Text 38. Atha jagam bhagavana narada sahatumburhu pratyuthaya bhivadhyastha sanujo yarchayan munim.
While Sanjaya was thus speaking, Sri Narada, the powerful devotee of the Lord, appeared on the scene carrying his tumburu. Maharaja Yudhishthira and his brothers received him properly by getting up from their seats and offering obeisance.
Yudhishthira Naham Veda Gatim Pitro Bhagavan Kwa Gata Vitaha Amba Vahata Putrartha Kwa Gata Cha Tapaswini.
Maharaja Yudhishthira said, "O godly personality, I do not know where my two uncles have gone, nor can I find my ascetic aunt, who is grief-stricken by the loss of all her sons."
Karnidhara iva pare Bhagavana Paradarshakaha Atha Bhashe Bhagavana Narado Muni Sattamaha.
You are like a captain of a ship in the great ocean, and you can direct us to our destination. Thus addressed, the godly personality, Devasi Narada, the greatest of the philosopher devotees, began to
Narada Vacha Ma Kanchan Shucho Rajan Yadishwara Vansham Jagat Loka Sapala Yasyeme Vahanti Balimishituhu Sanyunanti Bhutani Sa Eva Viyunakti Cha.
Sri Narada said, "O pious king, do not lament for anyone, for everyone is under the control of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, all living beings and their leaders carry on worship to be well protected. It is He only who brings them together and disperses them.
Yatha Gavo Nasi Protas Tantyam Baddhascha Damabhihi Vaktantyam Navabhirbadha Vahanti Balimishutuhu.
As a cow, bound through by nose by a long rope, is conditioned, so also human beings are bound by different Vedic injunctions and are conditioned to obey the orders of the Supreme.
Yatha Kridopaskaranam Sanyoga. I can't see. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yatha Kridopaskaranam Sanyoga Vigama Viha Ichaya Kriditu Syaptam Tathevesheshchaya Nidam.
As a player sets up and disperses his playthings according to his own sweet will, so the supreme will of the Lord brings men together and separates.
Yanmanyase dhruvam lokam adhruvam vanachobhayam sarvatha nahi shocyaste snehadanyatra mohajat.
O king, in all circumstances, whether you consider the soul to be an eternal principle, or the material body to be perishable, or anything to exist in the impersonal absolute truth, or anything to be in an inexplicable combination of matter and spirit, feelings of separation are due only to illusory affection and nothing more.
Tasmad jayanga vaiklavyam ajnana kratam atmanaha katham tvanatha kripana vartem raste cha mavina.
Therefore, give up your anxiety due to ignorance of the self. You are now thinking of how they, who are helpless, poor creatures, will exist without you.
कालकर्मण गुणाधीनो देहोऽयं पञ्चभौतिकः कथमन्यास्तु गोपायेत् सर्पग्रस्तो यथा परम्.
This gross material body made of 5 elements is already under the control of eternal time, kala, action, karma, and the modes of material nature, guna. How then can it, being already in the jaws of the serpent, protect others?
अहस्तानि सहस्तानाम् अपदानि चतुष्पदाम् फलगुनी तत्र महताम् जीवो जीवस्य जीवनम्.
Those who are devoid of hands are prey for those who have hands. Those devoid of legs are prey for the four-legged. The weak are the subsistence of the strong, and the general rule holds that one living being is food for another.
तदीदं भगवान् राजन्ने एक आत्मात्मनां स्वदृक् अन्तरोऽनन्तरो भाति पश्यतं माययोरुधा.
Therefore, O King, you should look to the Supreme Lord only, who is one without a second, and who manifests himself by different energies and is both within and without.
सोऽयमद्य महाराज भगवान् भूतभावना कालरूपोऽवतीर्णोऽस्यां भावाय सुरद्विषाम.
One Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, in the guise of all-devouring time, Kala Rupa, has now descended to the earth to eliminate the envious from the world.
निष्पादितं देवकृत्यम् अवशेषं प्रतीक्षते तावद् यूयमवेक्षध्वं भवेद यावदीहेश्वरः.
The Lord has already performed his duties to help the demigods, and he is awaiting the rest. You Pandavas may wait as long as the Lord is here on earth.
धृतराष्ट्रा सह भ्रात्रा गान्धार्या च स्वभार्यया दक्षिणेन हिमवत ऋषीणामाश्रमं गतः.
O King, your uncle Dhritarashtra, his brother Vidura, and his wife Gandhari have gone to the southern side of the Himalaya mountains, where there are shelters of the great sages.
स्रोतोभिः सप्तभिर्यावै स्वर्धुनी सप्तधा व्यधात् सप्तानां प्रीतये नाना सप्तस्रोत प्रचक्षते.
The place is called Saptastrata, divided by 7, because there the waters of the sacred Ganges were divided into 7 branches. This was done for the satisfaction
स्नात्वा नुसवनं तस्मिन् हुत्वा चाग्निं यथा विधि अपभक्ष उपशान्तात्मा स आस्ते विगतैषणः.
on the banks at Saptastrata. The Rashtra is now engaged in beginning Astanga Yoga by bathing 3 times daily, in the morning, noon, and evening, by performing the Agnihotra sacrifice with fire and by drinking only water. This helps one control the mind and the senses and frees one completely from thoughts of familiar.
जितासनो जितश्वास प्रत्याहृतश्दिनिन्द्रियः हरिभावनया ध्वस्त रजसत्वमोमलः.
One who has controlled the sitting postures, the yogic asanas, and the breathing process can turn the senses toward the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus become immune to the contaminations of the modes of material nature, namely mundane goodness, passion, and ignorance.
विज्ञानात्मनि संयोज्य क्षेत्रज्ञे प्रविलाप्यतम् ब्रह्मण्यात्मानमाधारे घटांबरमिवांबरे.
Dhritarashtra will have to amalgamate his pure identity with intelligence and then merge into the Supreme Being with knowledge of his qualitative oneness as a living entity with the Supreme Brahman. Being freed from the blocked sky, he will have to rise to the spiritual sky.
ध्वस्तमाया गुणोर्दर्को निरुद्धः करणाशयः निवर्तिताखिलाहार आस्ते साणुरिवाचलः तस्यान्तरायो मे वा भू संन्यस्ताखिलकर्मणः.
He will have to suspend all the actions of the senses, even from the outside, and he will have to be impervious to interactions of the senses, which are influenced by the modes of material nature. After renouncing all material duties, he must become immovably established beyond all sources of hindrances on the path.
सवा अद्यत्नाद्राजन् परत पंचमेहनि कलेवरं हास्यति स्वं तच्च भस्मी भविष्यति.
O king, he will quit his body, most probably on the 5th day from today, and his body will turn to ashes.
दह्यमानेऽग्निभिर्देहे पत्युपत्नी सहोटजे बहिः स्थिता पतिं साध्वी तमग्निमनुवेक्षति.
While outside observing her husband, who will burn in the fire of mystic power along with his thatched cottage, his chaste wife will enter the fire with rapt attention.
विदुरस्तु तदाश्चर्यं निशाम्य कुरु नन्दन हर्षयोगयुतस्तस्माद् गन्तातीर्थनिषेवकः.
Vidura, being affected with delight and grief, will then leave that place of sacred pilgrimage.
इत्युक्त्वाथारुहत् स्वर्गं नारद सह तुम्बुरुः युधिष्ठिरो वचस्तस्य हृदि कृत्वा जहाच्छुचः.
Having spoken thus, the great sage Narada, along with his Veena, ascended into outer space. Yudhishthira kept his instruction in his heart, and so was able to get rid of all lamentations. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for the recitations. That was nice, wonderful. Jyoti Mataji, can I share my screen?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, yes, I've made you host.
Okay, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you. So, I guess all of you can share the screen, see the screen. Yeah?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, thank you. So, we will start. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudire Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Yam Pravrajeta Manupetamupeta Krityam Dvaipayano Virahakatar Aju Ava Putreti Tanmayatayo Targo Bhinedustam Sarvabhuta Hridayam Vimanatosmi. So we are going to discuss 46th verse and 47th verse of 13th chapter of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we'll start. We'll chant the first verse, the 46th verse first, and then we'll go for the 47th one. कालकर्म गुणाधीनो देहोऽयं पाञ्चभौतिकः कथामन्यांस्तु गोपायेत् सर्पग्रस्तो यथा परम्. Word by word translation. Kala, eternal time. Karma, action. Guna, modes of nature. Adhinaha, under the control of. Deha, material body and mind. Ayam, this. Panchabhautikaha, made of 5 elements. Katham, how. Ayan, others. Tu, but. Gopayet, give protection. Sarpa, krastaha, one who is bitten by the snake. Yatha, as much as. Param, others. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Translation. This gross material body made of 5 elements is already under the control of eternal time, Kala, action, karma, and the modes of material nature, guna. How then can it, being already in the jaws of the serpent, protect others? Purport by Prabhupada. The world's movements for freedom through political, economic, social, and cultural propaganda can do no benefit to anyone, for they are controlled by superior power. A conditioned living being is under the full control of material nature, represented by eternal time and the activities under the dictation of different modes of nature. There are 3 material modes of nature, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. Unless one is situated in the mode of goodness, one cannot see things as they are. The passionate and the ignorant cannot even see things as they are. Therefore, a person who is passionate and ignorant cannot direct his activities on the right path. Only the man in the quality of goodness can help to a certain extent. Most persons are passionate and ignorant, and therefore their plans and projects can hardly do any good to others. Above the modes of nature is eternal time, which is called Kala, because it changes the shape of everything in the material world. Even if we are able to do something temporarily beneficial, time will see that the good project is frustrated in course of time. The only thing possible to be done is to get rid of eternal time, Kala, which is compared to Kala Sarpa, or the cobra snake, whose bite is always lethal. No one can be saved from the bite of a cobra. The best remedy for getting out of the clutches of the cobra like Kala, or its integrity, the modes of nature, is Bhakti Yoga, and it is recommended in Bhagavad Gita 14.26. We will go to that verse in a minute. The highest perfectional project of philanthropic activities is to engage everyone in the act of preaching Bhakti Yoga all over the world, because that alone can save the people from the control of Maya, or the material nature represented by Kala, Karma, and Guna, as described above. The Bhagavad Gita 14.26 confirms this definitely. So let's quickly read what is 14.26. Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatitaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. So it's a very famous verse. The Lord declares that one who engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. This purport is quite big, but it is very, very important and very powerful purport. Prabhupada has given a lot in this purport. So if time permits, we will go through. Otherwise, you can read at your own convenience. So we'll go to the next verse, 47. Ahastani sahastanam padani chatushpadam halguni tatra mahatam jio jivasya jivanam. Ahastani, those who are devoid of hands. Sahastanam, of those who are endowed with hands. Apadani, those who are devoid of legs. Chatuh padam, those who have 4 legs. Falguni, those who are weak. Tatra, there. Mahatam, of the powerful. Jivaha, the living being. Jivasya, of the living being. Jivanam, subsistence. Translation: those who are devoid of hands are prey for those who have hands. Those devoid of legs are prey for 4-legged. The weak are the subsistence of the strong, and the general rule holds that one living being is food for another. Purport: the systematic law of subsistence in the struggle for existence is there by the supreme will, and there is no escape for anyone by any amount of planning. The living beings who have come to the material world against the will of the Supreme Being are under the control of a supreme power called Maya Shakti, the deputed agent of the Lord. And this Devi Maya is meant to pinch the conditioned souls by 3-fold miseries, one of which is explained here in this verse. The weak are the subsistence of the strong. No one is strong enough to protect himself from the onslaught of a stronger, and by the will of the Lord, there are systematic categories of the weak, the stronger, and the strongest. There is nothing to be lamented if a tiger eats a weaker animal, including a man, because that is the law of the Supreme Lord. But although the law states that a human being must subsist on another living being, there is the law of good sense also, for a human being is meant to obey the laws of the scriptures. This is impossible for other animals. The human being is meant for self-realization, and for that purpose he is not to eat anything which is not first offered to the Lord. The Lord accepts from his devotee all kinds of food preparations made of vegetables, fruits, leaves, and grains. Fruits, leaves, and milk in different varieties can be offered to the Lord, and after the Lord accepts the food stuff, the devotee can partake of the prasada, by which all suffering in the struggle for existence will be gradually mitigated. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 9:26. Does anyone remind me what is 9:26? This verse.
Is it Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam or no?
Yes, Mataji. Thank you. Okay, great. Even those who are accustomed to eat animals can offer foodstuff not to the Lord directly, but to an agent of the Lord under certain conditions of religious rites. Injunctions of the scriptures are meant not to encourage the eaters of animals, but to restrict them by regulative principles. The living being is the source of subsistence for other stronger living beings. No one should be very anxious for his subsistence in any circumstances, because there are living beings everywhere, and no living being starves for want of food at any place. Maharaj Yudhishthir is advised by Narad not to worry about his uncles suffering for want of food, for they could live on vegetables available in the jungles as a prasad of the Supreme Lord, and thus realize the path of salvation. Exploitation of the weaker living beings by the stronger is the natural law of existence. There is always an attempt to devour the weak in different kingdoms of living beings. There is no possibility of checking this tendency by any artificial means under the material conditions. It can be checked only by awakening the spiritual sense of human being by the practice of spiritual regulations. Spiritual regulative principles, however, do not allow a man to slaughter weaker animals on one side and teach others peaceful coexistence. If man does not allow the animals peaceful coexistence, how can he expect peaceful existence in human society? The blind leaders must therefore understand the Supreme Being and then try to implement the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God, or Ramarajya, is impossible without the awakening of God consciousness in the mass mind of the people of the world. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Such a wonderful purports Prabhupada has given. So we will chant our Mangala Charana and start our discussions. Om Ajnantimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakkamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Saavadhutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesh Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Namo Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhatturunda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Ram Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkripatamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Paramanandamahamam Yamalambita Bhujau Kanakavadhato Sankirtane Kvitaro Kamalataksham Vishwambharo Dvijabharo Yugadharmapalo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karanavataram Yantah Pravishya Mamavachanimam Prasuttam Sanjeevayatya Akhila Shakti Dharaswadhamna Anyamscha Hasta Charana Shram Tvagim Pranam Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubbham. So we'll chant the verses again. Kala Karma Gunadhino Dehoyam Pancha Bhautikaha Kathamanyanstu Gopayets Rapagasto Yathaparam. This gross material body made of 5 elements is already under the control of eternal time, Kala, action, karma, and the modes of material nature, guna. How then can it, being already in the jaws of the serpent, protect others? So we will discuss this verse and then we will go to the next one. So here Narad Muni is enlightening Maharaj Yudhishthir by giving his valuable piece of advice. So earlier, his transcendental father, Maharaj Yudhishthir's father, he gave advice to whom? To Dhritarashtra, Vidura, who is Yamaraj. Dharmaraj is giving advice to Dhritarashtra. And Dhritarashtra followed that and he went to the forest. And then Narad Muni, the Manasaputra of Lord Brahma and his disciple as well, is now giving advice, is pacifying and giving advice to Maharaj Yudhishthir. So it comes, Prabhupada touches on a very important point of idea of freedom. We have a lot of freedom movements in the world, and freedom from slavery, freedom from gender identity. Nowadays in our office, there is LGBT, I don't know, quite a few letters are there. So they keep coming about the freedom. And then we have freedom of, there is a the feministic movement, and freedom for animals, and God knows, freedom for so many things. Sometime back, Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, His Holiness Bhakti Vikas Maharaj, gave a very fantastic example of dogs. And we will discuss that. If I forget, it's quite humorous the way he explains everything. So we will come to that. If I forget, please remind me, and we'll talk about that. So freedom, the word freedom itself. If we just think about this word, it's a very relative concept. One person's freedom can be another person's insecurity. And in the material world, the idea of freedom is a massive illusion. It's a huge illusion. Usually, it leads to either lawlessness or division in the society, and we know that means how that idea of freedom, because what people want in freedom is they don't want a restriction on themselves. So, and there is a reason for restriction, whether it's a restriction by nature, restriction by the law of the land, restriction for a reason. Some of the restrictions are unjustified, not justifiable, and we all understand that. But generally, most of the restrictions, legally or morally, are for a reason. And a lot of people want freedom from that. And if not openly, sometimes mentally, they want that freedom. An example is in America, there is a freedom for having guns, and we know what's the result of that. There are so many killings. So, is that really a freedom? Big question. And we were just talking about, we know so many freedom movements, and politicians and media will glorify those movements, but there is always a darker side of it. If they achieve that freedom, or if they snatch that so-called concept of freedom, the human mind will not be happy with that, because material freedom has the very, very deep, very powerful undercurrent of sense gratification. And what comes with that? Obviously, our material existence has 4 defects. What are those 4 defects? Can anyone remind me those 4 defects? What are the faults we have? What are the material faults we have?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
We have cheating tendency.
Yes. Yeah.
We also have 4 defects.
Yeah.
It's not coming in my mind.
No, that's fine. I know you know that quite well. You and me, we have discussed it so many times. So, yeah. Tendency to commit mistakes.
Hare
We are
Krishna,
under
Prabhuji.
illusion.
Is that
Illusion.
imperfect senses, Prabhuji? In imperfect senses?
Yes. Imperfect senses.
Illusion.
What about forgetfulness?
Forgetfulness of our identity. Yes.
Illusion.
Exactly. Yeah. So 4 defects are propensity to cheat, tendency to commit mistakes, illusion, and we have imperfect senses. So, as we are coming to this point of freedom, can we imagine if somebody gets the freedom, and if these 4 defects are very much connected to that freedom, what will happen? There can't be any happiness there in that freedom. So that's where it comes to, that freedom itself is a very fictitious, it's a very relative idea. The synchronization of time, body, karma, and desires for freedom. If there is no bhakti, that will be very dangerous, because we will use the time which is very limited to us for our either personal sense gratification or extended sense gratification, which in modern terms it's called charity. Yeah. Body. Obviously, body means we have senses and we have the demands of the senses. So naturally, the sense gratification will be the prime objective if there is no angle of bhakti, if the objective is not bhakti. Karma, body and time, which will come to karma, and any activity we do will be a sinful activity because it is not related to bhakti. And in the next verse, we are coming to that point of Jivo Jivasya Jivanam. Desire for, and the desire, which is Prabhupada is talking here about a guna. Yeah. So desire is basically our intelligence is giving us the ability to discriminate whether to do or not to do, and to evaluate that time. In economics terms, we can say cost benefit analysis, and according to that kala, karma, guna, and with the factor of time, we are moving on. We are progressing, and our back door is closing very slowly without us realizing that. If we don't use this synchronization of time, body, karma, and desires for the freedom on the path of bhakti, then we are no different than the animal who is whose objective is eating, sleeping, mating, defending. So, what is what our Aradhya Devat Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Na dhanam na janam na sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamahe mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhakti rahita kittvai. So what he is saying is, I don't want any money, I don't want any followers, na janam, na sundarim, I don't want any kind of worldly beauty. Kavitam va jagadisha kamahe. I don't want any knowledge which will attach me to this material world, to material senses. What I want is mama janmani janmanishvare. Birth after birth after birth means eternally. I just want the opportunity to serve you, to love you, to have that beautiful reciprocation of serving you. And that's what the prayer is, and that is the Shikshashtakam, that is basically the gospel's truth. That's what is the instruction of Mahaprabhu for us, all the 8 verses of Shikshashtakam. So, we were talking about the example of dogs. In Western world, if we see the dogs, they're tied up. Then they have some dogs which are a bit ferocious. Their mouth is covered. The whole face of dog is just a long big nose, so it keeps sniffing everywhere. And the owner of the dog, it actually controls its movement, what it should eat, and lot of things. The veterinary doctor or the surgeon will be examining the dogs and giving different injections and so on. So does it have a freedom? It's very limited. When a dog has to go out for the nature's call, that is the freedom dog has. Otherwise, the owner of the dog will say, okay, let's go out, and dog will go. Otherwise, it will sit in its own dog house, and that's basically it. So that is the freedom in this Western world. And some of the dogs, let's take the example of India. So their dogs have freedom, and those dogs, you can see that on the street, it barks whenever it wants, and then it can eat something on the road, or what people throw. Some people who don't like dogs, they throw stones at the dogs, and then at night the dog feels that freedom because there are no people around, and then the dog starts barking and it thinks that yes, I'm so free. But at the same time, if the dog is hungry, then yeah, the dog's freedom doesn't help. So here, one dog in the Western world, we can call Tommy, doesn't have any freedom. But is the dog happy? Uh, it's it's relative. And the another dog, we can say some Raja in India, and that dog is just a stray dog loitering in everywhere on the street. Um, that dog has a freedom. Is that dog happy? Or is that the proper freedom? If our situation, Maharaj was saying that it's very much like that dog, if we are not on the path of bhakti, because either we are working like like that dog for our master, um, in the material world and in the mode of passion, what Prabhupada is explaining here, or the dog, or we have that freedom of not working, or little bit of work here and there and just moving around. Is that freedom helpful? And the way Bhakti Vikas Maharaj was explaining that whole elaborate details of the dog's freedom and dogs not having freedom, I found it incredibly humorous and quite fascinating, his whole analysis in that. So similarly, if we roam around in the big cities where people are, let's take the example of London, at night, if we go for the Mangalarti in Soho Street, and if we reach there around 3 o'clock, we can see people intoxicated and a lot of broken glass bottles, and fights and everything there around us. It's quite scary because the people have freedom. Few of them have some kind of knives and God knows what kind of weapons and armaments they have. Some have wild thoughts and idea, since they are out of control, and we can see that on the road in any of the downtowns or town centers. And we don't have to discuss that in fair details because we all know that. And what Prabhupada is explaining here is the kala, the time, the kala sarpa. It is slowly coming towards us if we are not careful enough to use our time properly. As His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj explains in a lot of his lectures, that if we don't use our time properly, we have lost it forever. Even if we have the whole wealth of this world, we cannot get that time back. So how important it is to use that time and that freedom, that free will God has given us for the right cause. And what is that right cause? To be His servant, to follow that path of bhakti. We have used the freedom to manipulate this material nature. Medicine we have used, and we know that pharma lobby and COVID we have experienced recently, what effect that misuse of medicine and the scientific research and all that how that has affected us. Surgery, it has its advantages, definitely, but as we were saying, the freedom of manipulating this material nature, surgery, what is the disadvantage? somebody who is dying because of the failure of the organ, if there is a possibility of transplant, that person will survive. But at the same time, the darker side is, if the person is forcibly taken the organ out and used for transplant and shown as a donation, isn't that something really horrible? And it's applicable to the technology. Just because of certain misunderstandings on social media, so much of destruction of wealth, chaos, animosity we are seeing across the world. So freedom to manipulate the material nature, how important it is that we have to use it very carefully. If we don't use it with right consciousness, at least in mode of goodness, and if possible on the path of bhakti for devotional service, we are misusing that freedom for our own destruction. And that's basically the underlying message what Prabhupada is giving here. Only when one surrenders in the mood of pure devotion, that freedom is the right one, is the correct freedom we will be using. And that is there in Bhagavad Gita 1855, and which is our original position, totally blissful, in pure mode of goodness, which is called, in Sanskrit it is called Vishuddha Sattva, and a form which is complete for our original purpose of the service to the Lord, free from birth, death, old age and disease. And that is the true freedom. And that's what, if we use the Kala, and that cobra bite will not be for the devotee, it will be the Sheshanag. He will take us, our Adi Guru, Lord Balram, who is the Supreme Personality of servitude, Supreme Personality of Godhead in the mood of servitude. He will take us to the right position. He will give us our Siddha Bhakti, and that's what this purport is, the underlying message is here. So that's what this particular verse we were discussing about. Let's go to the next verse. This was the verse, I think, we can see here. Bhaktyamam abhijanati yavan yaschasmi tatvatah tatomam tatvato jnatva vishate tadanantaram. One can understand me as I am, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, only by devotional service. And when one is in full consciousness of me by such devotion, he can enter into the kingdom of God. And that is the real freedom. We may come to this verse again. But yeah, here it says, Naham Prakasha Sarvasya. I think in our last discussion, we discussed about this verse. Yogamaya Samavruddha, Mudoyam na Vijanati, Lokomam Aham Avyayam. That's what this 725 verse is. Yeah, so I think it's already 8:40. We have to discuss one more verse, so we'll go to that now. Ahastani Sahastana Apadani Chatushpadam Falguni Tatra Mahatam Jivo Jivasya Jivanam. Those who are devoid of hands are prey for those who have hands. Those devoid of legs are prey for four-legged. The weak are the subsistence of the strong, and the general rule holds that one living being is food for another. So, survival of the fittest and struggle for existence, adaptation, mimicry, this is all the so-called scientist called Charles Darwin. He came up with this idea. Only thing is, because there was no God consciousness, there was no bhakti, he completely missed the point. He was basically like a stray dog in India who was giving all sorts of concoctions with a lot of logic in it, but not missing the basic point of devotional service. So he himself misunderstood the law of the nature. Why? Because he was trying to derive his understanding with the inductive knowledge, as His Holiness Shivram Maharaj says that the knowledge, inductive knowledge, is always concoctive knowledge, because it comes like a pyramid. You have so much of information, some more information, you are coming to this conclusion and going up, and finally here you say, okay, that's what the conclusion is, and then sometime later somebody builds another pyramid and the conclusion is different. And that's the inductive knowledge. As Maharaj says that knowledge should come from the Supreme Lord, and that is the deductive knowledge, which should come in parampara. Evam parampara praptam mimam rajarshayo viduhu. So that's what Lord has instructed us how to gain that knowledge. So essence of the verse is the mightiest exploits the weaker. And that's how this world is designed. How the might of, or the stronger person or the stronger jiva will do that in different ways. In case of humans, if somebody has a power, and if the person is little bit cultured or civilized, we can say, need not have to be properly cultured all the time, they will use samadama danda bhed, try to give some, have a good words, discuss and get the work done, for the subsistence, for the selfish cause. So that is way of discussion. And then demands. Dama means giving some bribe. That is the second mode. Danda means punishing the person, giving some penalty, some kind of soft punishment. So that is called danda. And the last one is bhed, which is fight, right up to the killing that person. That is bhed. So if the entities in the animal kingdom, usually they will either go for, if their selfish instincts are harmed, then they will go for either danda or bhed. So that's what the animal kingdom is. In human kingdoms, which is relatively, we have a higher intelligence, so we follow this samadama danda bhed. Lot of times mightier one have a good reason to dominate the weaker ones. For example, why ecological cycles exist, and why the cycle of daily life of hard work exists. And that's the, if we see that, there will be several reasons we can see. They have to survive, they have to defend themselves, and it's basically comes to the principles of eating, sleeping, mating, defending. The question will come here, why God is so cruel? A common man with just mundane material logic will come to this point, that why God is so cruel, that yes, you have to exploit the weaker one for the survival. Why is it like that? And as time progresses, that question will even become more prominent if the person thinks in the mode of goodness. As the world is getting more and more competitive, more demanding at work, demands for money, demands of expectations from the family, from the society, from the colleagues, from friends, our own expectations in terms of the position, and our so-called status and so on, etc. And here the principle of Falguni Tatra Mahatam is even more relevant. So if we see Falguni, those who are weak, Tatra, there, Mahatam, of the powerful. Yeah. So that expression becomes even more relevant here. So we'll come to that question in a minute. For a material body, we are unknowingly committing sins. Krishna consciousness devotees, we have a solution for that, and they cause least pain to the other living entities, as we saw in the last verse, Patra Pushpa Phalam Toyam. So we have a very limited resources in terms of how to fulfill our requirements. No killing of animals, no intoxication. So we have that Patra Pushpa Phalam Toyam, offer it to the Lord and honor that prasadam. That's what Lord has given us. That's the instruction in the Bhagavad Gita. And that is also with gratitude. The mood of gratitude is always there. It is we know that it is purifying. So devotees, we try to come to the point that we will incur no sin by following the devotional service, and if we have to divert our path from devotional service for something else, still there is a in our subconscious mind that we have to come back. Apicheta suduracharo madhibhajate mamanam. Little bit of non-devotional activities, or Prabhupada says abominable activities, if a devotee does, still the person is resolute determination on the path of devotional service, and Lord takes care of cleaning our reactions for sinful activities. We have discussed that so many times. Even the thought of troubling others can be, if we have a thought of troubling others, other person can feel that, and I think all of us have that experience. If somebody is sitting in one room, and if that person is really unhappy about other person, and they have that thought of anger or some kind of resentment or something similar, the lot of times the other person can feel that, and how that happens there with this material logic, we can't understand that. That is something paranormal. Devotional service washes that tendency away, as Bhishmadev says in his prayers when he gives advice to Yudhishthir Maharaj, that solution to anger is forgiveness, and that will calm the person down, and that's the beauty, the power of devotional service. So coming back to the question of this Falguni Tatra Mahatam Jivo Jivasya Jivanam, why God is so cruel, why there is exploitation, if devotional service is so wonderful and we are supposed to follow that, then why this mix of Falguni Tatra Mahatam is there? So we'll come to the point of analyzing a little bit about the animal body, which is full of sufferings. Soul gets the body to burn the karma, that animal body, to burn the karmic reactions accumulated when that soul had a human form, human body, and that soul hasn't followed the path of devotional service. So in human form of life, we have a lot of responsibility, and obviously we have a power of intelligence, power of discrimination, and more freedom than animals. So we have a lot of responsibility to act very carefully. And the solution for this anxiety to follow that path of responsibility properly is the path of bhakti. From where dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhirastatra namuyati. Change of body, miseries, everything will happen, those threefold miseries. But the path of bhakti gives us the objective, gives us the solution, gives us that idea of where we are heading to. What is our final goal? And still, for the animal kingdom as well, the Lord is so merciful to provide all the necessities of eating. He has created so much of grass and grains and fruits, and for tiger, the lower animals, the herbivores and everything. So he has created, even if it is a miserable, it's a very heavy karma burning life, but still Lord has given all the necessities for eating, sleeping, mating, because he has created male and female, and then defending, for given the fur, and in different environments the living entity has got different body according to what they desire and what they deserve. So it's arranged at the time of birth, and it's our choice to either to be comfortable with the arrangement in the material world or cross this ocean of material miseries. And what's the famous verse for that? Yetu karmani sarvani mahi sanyasya matparaha ananyenaiva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate tesham aham samuddharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami na chirat partha mayyaveshita chetasam. So let's quickly go to that verse. It's in the 12th chapter, devotional service, and here it is, 6th and 7th. Yetu karmani sarvani mahisanyasya matparaha ananyena iva yogena mam dhyayanta upasate tesham aham samuddharta mrityu samsara sagara bhavami na chirat partha mayyaveshita chetasam. Very, very important, very beautiful verse, and very promising, very pacifying verse when we are in anxiety because of these miseries of the material world. But those who worship me, giving up all their activities unto me and being devoted to me without deviation, engaged in devotional service and always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death. And here are some other verses. That's the Patra Pushpaphalam Toyam Yome Bhaktya Prayachati. This verse I think we just talked about. This is another important verse. Bhogeshwarya prasaktanam taya aparutu chetasam vyavasayatmika buddhi samadho na vidhiyate. In the minds of those who are too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination of devotion for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. So how important the Kala principle we were talking about. If the person, living entity, is too attached to sense enjoyment and material opulence, same Kunti Devi says, Bhogeshwarya Prasaktanam in her prayers, and who are bewildered by such things, the resolute determination for devotional service to the Supreme Lord does not take place. Next verse after that is also very, very important. Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna Nirdvando Nitya Satvastho Niryoga Kshema Atmavan. The Vedas deal mainly with the subject of the three modes of material nature. O Arjuna, become transcendental to these three modes. Be free from all dualities and from all anxieties for gain and safety, and be established in the self. Later on, Lord says that Vishaya Vinivartante Niraharasya Dehina. This is about the sense enjoyment. Rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate. Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense enjoyment remains. How important our senses are. Kala, karma, deha, and guna, and our desires. So how important those are. This is what the confirmation in the Bhagavad Gita, second chapter is. But seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, which is bhakti, which is devotional service, he is fixed in consciousness. And then we will come to this. We'll end with this verse. Yajnashishtashinah santo muchyante sarvakilvishaihi bhunjante tattvagam papa ye panchantyaatma karanat. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sin. And that's a very, very important and essential instruction for the human beings in this material world. So we will stop here. Are there any comments, questions, additions, or ideas? No questions?
Hare Krishna Prayagraj Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Wonderful class. Very highly. It goes beyond my head.
No.
Very, very, very elaborated and wonderful. What I felt is that, at the beginning, what you mentioned,
Mhm.
that different people are, looking for freedom of different sets of freedom. The dogs,
Yeah.
the colleagues in the office, and all these things. Actually, because we are the spirit soul, we are actually, eventually we are liberated. But because we've been conditioned with our material body and subtle body and all that,
Yeah.
still, if the spirit soul wants to be liberated, but
Yeah.
they haven't come to the devotional service. So that's why they are looking for different paths. Eventually, when they get the knowledge from Srila Prabhupada through our books,
Yeah.
they will come. So everybody is looking for freedom, but they haven't been shown, or
Yeah.
they have no understanding of the real freedom. That's why people are looking for this kind of drinking and all these things. They're really looking for real freedom,
Yes.
but
Absolutely.
they haven't got in touch with the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita. That's why it's all happening all over the world. So this time,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really, that's why we need to hear and hear and hear.
Yes.
That's how we'll get purified and
I
get
think,
service. Yeah, thank you.
yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mataji. Such a wonderful comment. Last time, once I was doing some reference work, and that time His Holiness Romapad Swami, he made such a powerful, such an essential comment that when Prabhupada started this movement, ISKCON, that time we all know the story. Who used to come in that small 26-second avenues, the small shop, and how it started. What Prabhupada Maharaj said, that just by hearing and chanting, Prabhupada was giving lectures, scriptures, chanting, and prasadam. So many people were elevated to such an extent. Obviously, it is the pure devotee who is following the Ragatmika Bhakti, Srila Prabhupada. His mercy, he made that statement. I made that qualification for all of you. And Prabhupada Maharaj said that because it was Prabhupada's hearing and Prabhupada gave that mantra, the chanting, and gave the proper knowledge of what to eat, how to live, how to regulate the senses and everything. Quickly the movement flourished, and we can see that around us very, very vividly. So yes, thank you, Palika Mataji. It's always nice to.
Hare Krishna. Hare. Thank you. You know, it's so important for us to keep us hearing. That's the way that,
Absolutely.
that's how Srila Prabhupada, you know, spoke to them. And because Srila Prabhupada is completely pure soul,
Yes.
so their heart was penetrated through these wonderful words, and that's why they got, you know, purified very quickly.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because it's from the pure devotee.
Yes, definitely.
So wonderful. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare. Any other questions or comments? No questions? It would be nice if there is any interaction, because sometimes this a whole 1 hour when any speaker speaks, it's just I can see myself in the camera and the verses, and that's what. So it's a very monologue type of thing. So for quite some time, and then if Palika Mataji is there or some other devotees are there, then they sometimes interact. But it's nice to have the interaction, some kind of comments, additions, or any question answers. But anyway, I can't force anybody to ask questions. So we'll stop here. Thank you, everybody, for your precious time. You're using your kala for the right cause, for the discussion and the hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam. We'll stop here. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Jai Hare.
Hare.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Prabhuji, for a nice class. Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. So, yeah. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Krishna Prabhuji, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji. Hare Krishna.